In the autumn of 1907, in a small village nestled in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, a photograph was taken that would haunt historians for over a century. The image shows a young girl, no more than 8 years old, clutching a porcelain doll against her chest. Her eyes, when examined closely, reveal a depth of sorrow and desperation that seems impossible for someone so young. But this photograph tells a story far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined at first glance. This is the story of Elena Pescu, a child whose life was forever changed by circumstances beyond her control, and how a simple doll became both her salvation and her burden in a world that had forgotten how to show mercy to the innocent. Before we dive into Elena's extraordinary tale, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our stories of human resilience, tragedy, and the incredible ways people have survived the darkest chapters of history. The village of Racun sat like a forgotten jewel among the rolling hills of Wachia, its cobblestone streets worn smooth by generations of farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who had called this place home. In 1907, Romania was a kingdom caught between the old world and the new, where horse-drawn carts shared the roads with the occasional automobile, and where ancient superstitions still governed daily life, alongside increasingly modern sensibilities. The Popescu family owned a small but prosperous bakery on the ville's main street. George Popescu, Elena's father, was known throughout Racun for his exceptional bread and his generous heart. He would often give loaves to families who couldn't afford them, believing that no child should go to bed hungry. His wife Maria was equally beloved, known for her beautiful embroidery and her gentle way with the village children who would gather around her during the long winter evenings to hear stories of brave princes and wise queens. Elena was their only child, born after years of hoping and praying for a baby. She had inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's warm brown eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she would toddle around the bakery, her small hands dusted with flour, bringing smiles to even the most serious customers. The porcelain doll that would become so central to Elena's story was a gift for her 7th birthday in the spring of 1907. Georgia had traveled all the way to Bucharest to purchase it from a renowned toy maker whose dolls were said to be works of art. The doll had auburn hair arranged in perfect ringlets, rosy cheeks painted with the finest techniques, and eyes of deep blue glass that seemed almost alive. Elena named her Luminita, meaning little light, and from that day forward, the two were inseparable. "She's not just a doll, Papa," Elena would say as she carefully brushed Luminita's hair each morning. "She's my friend. She listens to all my secrets and never tells anyone." GY would smile and ruffle his daughter's hair. "Then she must be very special indeed, Dragulo. A friend who keeps secrets is a treasure beyond measure." The summer of 1907 was particularly harsh, with drought affecting much of the region. Crops withered in the fields and many families found themselves struggling to put food on their tables. Despite their own challenges, the Popescus continued their tradition of helping their neighbors, often giving away more bread than they sold. Maria would pack extra loaves for Elena to distribute to the families with young children, teaching her daughter the importance of compassion and community. It was during one of these rounds of delivery that Elena first encountered the Moldovan family. Recent arrivals to Racun, who had fled their hometown after a series of failed harvests, left them with nothing. The family consisted of Ion Moldovan, his pregnant wife Anka, and their 3 young sons, ages 4, 6, and 9. They had taken shelter in an abandoned cottage on the outskirts of the village, and when Elena arrived with bread from her parents, she was shocked by what she saw. The cottage was barely habitable, with holes in the roof and gaps in the walls that let in the cold mountain air. The children were thin and pale, their clothes patched and repatched until they were more thread than original fabric. But what struck Elena most was the look in their eyes, a hollowness that spoke of hunger, not just for food, but for hope itself. "Mama sent this," Elena said quietly, holding out the loaf of fresh bread to Anka, who was sitting by a small fire, her hands protectively covering her swollen belly. Anka's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. "Thank you, little one. May God bless your family for their kindness." The oldest boy, Petru, stepped forward and looked longingly at Luminita, who Elena carried everywhere she went. "Is that your doll?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, her name is Luminita," Elena replied, clutching the doll a little tighter. Something in the boy's expression made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite understand why. "She's beautiful," Petru said, his eyes never leaving the doll. "I bet she never gets hungry or cold." Elena visited the Moldovan family several more times over the following weeks, always bringing food and sometimes small gifts, a jar of her mother's preserves, warm socks that Maria had knitted, or drawings she had made to brighten their dreary cottage. Each time she noticed Petru watching Luminita with an intensity that made her hold the doll closer to her chest. The situation in Rakachuni continued to deteriorate as summer turned to autumn. The drought had destroyed most of the grain crops, and what little food was available had become prohibitively expensive. Even prosperous families like the Pescas found themselves making difficult choices about how to allocate their dwindling resources. It was during this time of growing desperation that the unthinkable happened. Elena had gone to visit old Mrs. Vacarescu, a widow who lived alone in a small house near the village church. The elderly woman had been like a grandmother to Elena, and every week the little girl would bring her bread and spend an hour or two listening to stories of the old days when the village was young and the world seemed full of possibilities. Elena had left Luminita on Mrs. Vacarescu's kitchen table, while she helped the old woman tend to her small garden behind the house. When they returned to the kitchen for tea and honey cakes, the doll was gone. "Where is Luminita?" Elena asked, her voice rising with panic as she searched under the table and behind the chairs. Mrs. Vacarescu was equally puzzled. "I don't know, Dragul mio. She was right there when we went outside." They searched the entire house, looking in every room, under every piece of furniture, and through every basket and chest. But Luminita had simply vanished, as if she had never been there at all. Elena ran home in tears, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too deep for someone so young. When she burst through the bakery door, Gheorghe immediately dropped the loaf of bread he was shaping and gathered his daughter into his arms. "What's wrong, my little star? What has happened?" Between gasps and hiccups, Elena managed to explain about Luminita's disappearance. Maria joined them, her own eyes filling with tears as she saw her daughter's anguish. "We'll find her," Gheorghe promised, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Tomorrow we'll organize a search. The whole village will help." But even as he spoke these words, he suspected that Luminita hadn't simply wandered away or been misplaced. In times of such hardship, even the most honest people sometimes made choices they would never have considered in better circumstances. A doll as beautiful and valuable as Luminita could be sold or traded for desperately needed food or medicine. The next day, true to his word, Guy organized a search party. Nearly every family in Rukun participated, combing through houses, barns, storage sheds, and the surrounding countryside. But as the hours passed without any sign of the doll, Elena's hope began to fade. It was Vasile Gorescu, the village blacksmith, who finally solved the mystery. He had been searching near the abandoned cottage where the Moldovan family had been staying when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The family was gone, not just absent, but completely vanished, along with all their meager possessions. In the dirt floor of the cottage, partially buried under a loose floorboard, Vasile found a small piece of blue glass, the same deep blue as Luminita's eyes. When Gheorghe and the other searchers arrived at the cottage, the implications were immediately clear. The Moldovan family had taken Luminita, probably to sell her in another town where she wouldn't be recognized. For a family facing starvation, the doll represented enough money to buy food for weeks, perhaps even months. "How could they do this?" Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "We helped them. We gave them food, clothing, kindness. How could they steal from our child?" Gheorghe had no answer. He understood the desperation that might drive a parent to such an act, but that understanding did nothing to ease the pain of seeing his daughter's heart broken by the very people they had tried to help. Elena's reaction to the news was not what her parents expected. Instead of anger or demands for justice, she seemed to withdraw into herself, becoming quiet and distant in a way that was completely unlike her normally vibrant personality. She stopped helping in the bakery, stopped visiting the neighbors, and spent most of her time sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the road as if waiting for Luminita to come walking home. Days turned into weeks, and Elena's condition only worsened. She barely ate, spoke only when directly addressed, and seemed to have lost all interest in the activities that once brought her joy. Maria and Georga consulted the village doctor, who could find nothing physically wrong with their daughter, but was deeply concerned about her emotional state. "She's grieving," the doctor explained. To her, that doll wasn't just a toy. It was a friend, a confidant, a piece of her own identity. Losing Luminita feels like losing a part of herself. "But what can we do?" Maria asked desperately. "We can't bring the doll back, and we can't undo what was done to her." The doctor had no easy answers, but he did have a suggestion. "Sometimes when we can't recover what we've lost, we have to find a way to honor its memory. Perhaps Elena needs to say goodbye to Luminita properly, to find some way of keeping her friend's memory alive while still being able to move forward with her own life." It was Maria who came up with the idea for the photograph. The village had recently welcomed a traveling photographer, a man named Constantine Radulescu, who made his living taking portraits of families and documenting important events throughout the region. Maria approached him with the unusual request. She wanted him to take a special photograph of Elena, one that would somehow capture both her loss and her love for the doll she would never see again. Constantine was initially puzzled by the request, but as Maria explained Elena's story, he became increasingly intrigued by the artistic and emotional possibilities. "Bring me one of the doll's belongings," he suggested. "Something that belonged to Luminita that Elena can hold in the photograph. It will help her feel connected to her friend, while also creating a lasting memorial." The only thing they had left of Luminita was a small wooden comb that Georga had carved specifically for the doll's hair. Elena had found it hidden under her bed, apparently dropped and forgotten during one of their daily grooming sessions. On a grey November morning, Elena stood in Constantine's makeshift studio, which he had set up in the back room of the village inn. She wore her best dress, a deep blue velvet creation that Maria had sewn for special occasions, and she held the tiny wooden comb against her chest in the same way she had once held Luminita. Constantine worked carefully, adjusting the lighting and positioning to capture not just Elena's image, but the complex emotions playing across her young face. As he prepared to take the photograph, he spoke gently to his subject. "Elena, I want you to think about Luminita. Remember all the good times you had together, all the stories you shared, all the love you felt for each other. That love doesn't disappear just because she's not here anymore. It lives on in your heart, and it will live on in this photograph." When Elena looked into the camera lens, she was thinking about her beloved doll. Not just about losing her, but about all the moments of joy they had shared together. She was thinking about the mornings when she would carefully brush Luminita's hair and plan out their adventures for the day. She was thinking about the quiet evenings when she would whisper her secrets and dreams to the only friend who truly understood her. And she was thinking about forgiveness, about the family who had taken Luminita away, and about the complicated nature of human beings who could be capable of both kindness and cruelty. The photograph that Constantine captured that day would indeed prove to be extraordinary, though not in any supernatural sense. What made the image so compelling was the depth of emotion visible in Elena's eyes, a complex mixture of loss, love, wisdom, and a kind of mature sadness that seemed far beyond her years. When the developed photograph was enlarged decades later, viewers would be struck by the intensity of her gaze, by the way she seemed to be looking not just at the camera, but into some distant place where beloved things that have been lost might still exist. In the weeks following the photograph session, Elena began the slow process of healing. The ritual of the portrait seemed to have given her permission to both mourn her loss and begin moving forward. She started helping in the bakery again, tentatively at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as she rediscovered her love of working alongside her parents and serving their community. She also began to show interest in helping other children in the village, particularly those who, like the Moldovan children, found themselves in difficult circumstances through no fault of their own. Elena seemed to have developed an unusual capacity for empathy, an ability to understand and connect with others who were experiencing loss or hardship. "She's grown up, hasn't she?" Maria observed to her husband one evening as they watched Elena carefully teaching a younger child how to knead bread dough. Luminita changed her. "She's still our little girl, but there's something different about her now, something deeper." Georga nodded thoughtfully. "She's learned that the world can be both beautiful and painful sometimes at the same time. That's not an easy lesson for anyone to learn, especially a child, but I think it will make her stronger, more compassionate. She'll be able to help others because she understands what it means to hurt. The winter of 1907-1908 was harsh, but the Pescu family weathered it together, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had faced. Elena never forgot Luminita, but she learned to carry her love for the doll without the crushing weight of loss that had initially threatened to overwhelm her. Spring brought unexpected news to Racuni. A merchant traveling through the region reported seeing a family matching the Moldovan's description in a town nearly 100 miles away. They were living in even worse conditions than when they had been in Rakuchin, and the merchant had noticed a young boy carrying a beautiful porcelain doll that seemed strangely out of place, given the family's obvious poverty. Some of the villagers wanted to organize an expedition to recover the doll and bring the thieves to justice, but Elena surprised everyone with her response. "No," she said quietly but firmly when her father asked if she wanted them to try to bring Luminita home. "If Petru still has her, it means they couldn't sell her. Maybe he loves her now, the way I did. Maybe she's helping him the way she helped me. I don't want to take that away from him." Elena's decision to let Luminita go completely was met with mixed reactions from the adults around her. Some admired her maturity and forgiveness, while others worried that she was simply suppressing her true feelings to avoid causing trouble. But as the months passed, it became clear that Elena's choice had been genuine. She showed no signs of regret or lingering sadness about the doll, and her ability to find joy in everyday life continued to grow stronger. The photograph that Constantine had taken remained prominently displayed in the Pescu home, but it was no longer a shrine to loss. Instead, it had become a celebration of Elena's capacity for love, for resilience, and for the kind of wisdom that can only come from experiencing deep pain and choosing to transform it into something meaningful. Years later, when Elena was a young woman, she would marry a teacher from a neighboring village and have children of her own. She would tell them the story of Luminita, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson about the complex nature of human beings and the importance of understanding the circumstances that sometimes drive people to make difficult choices. People are not simply good or bad, she would explain to her children as they gathered around her in the evenings. They are complicated, and they make decisions based on fear, love, desperation, hope, and 100 other emotions that we might not be able to understand. The family who took Luminita weren't evil people. They were scared, hungry people who made a choice that hurt me because they were trying to protect their own children. Learning to forgive them didn't mean what they did was right, but it meant I didn't have to carry anger and bitterness for the rest of my life. The photograph itself would outlive not just Elena, but her children and grandchildren as well. It would eventually find its way into the collection of a Romanian historical society, where researchers studying life in rural Romania during the early 20th century would be struck by the extraordinary emotional intensity captured in the image of the young girl holding a small wooden comb. When digital technology made it possible to examine the photograph in extreme detail, viewers from around the world would be moved by Elena's expression, by the way her eyes seemed to hold entire stories of love, loss, and hard-won wisdom. Many would describe feeling chills when looking at the enlarged image, not because of anything supernatural, but because of the very human recognition of seeing their own experiences of loss and resilience reflected in the face of a child who had lived more than a century before them. Elena Pescu's story, preserved in that single photograph, would become a testament to the human capacity for healing, for forgiveness, and for finding meaning in even the most painful experiences. Her image would remind viewers that behind every historical photograph lies a complex human story, and that the emotions captured in a moment of time can continue to resonate and inspire long after the subjects themselves have passed into memory. The little girl in the Romanian photograph of 1907 would be remembered not for the tragedy that befell her, but for the grace with which she transformed that tragedy into wisdom, compassion, and ultimately a deeper appreciation for the precious, fragile, and irreplaceable nature of love itself. In the end, Luminita had given Elena far more than just companionship during her early childhood. The doll had provided her with an opportunity to learn some of life's most important lessons about loss, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit, and perhaps that more than any material possession was the greatest gift of all. a gift that would continue to influence Elena's life and the lives of those she touched for generations to come. The photograph stands as a reminder that sometimes our most profound growth comes not from what we gain, but from how we choose to handle what we lose. And that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose compassion over bitterness, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair. Elena's story continues to touch hearts more than a century later, proving that the human capacity for love and forgiveness is perhaps the most powerful force of all, one that can transform not just individual lives, but the very way we understand what it means to be human in a world that is often both cruel and beautiful. Sometimes within the same moment, sometimes within the same